Good day, everyone. My name is EJ Mark Kevin Tumaliu Sidro, and I welcome you all to the first ever lesson for this subject, Math 114, also known as the differential calculus. Okay, so for today's video, we'll be talking about functions. Okay, so I have here the topic learning outcome for this lesson. We have four, okay? So at the end of the lesson, students should be able to identify functions from a given arrow diagrams, set of ordered pairs, equations, or graphs. Number two, students should be able to determine the domain and the range of a function. Number three, you should be able to perform the operations on algebraic functions. And number four, you should be able to identify special types of algebraic functions. Okay. So let us first define what is function. So what is a function? Okay, so I have here two groups. Suppose we have two groups that are related to each other. And these groups are composed of members. Okay, so we have members in each group. Okay, the group itself is, in mathematics, it is referred to as what we call set. Okay, so we have two sets here. Okay, and the members of each set of each group is referred to as what we call elements. Okay, and one group or one set is a collection of all inputs, and the other one is the collection of all outputs. Okay, and the rule that defines the relationship between elements of each set is what we call the function. That's the definition of the function. But you have to be very careful because in mathematics, function has a deeper meaning. It has the definition of a function is more than just the rule that defines the relationship between elements. Okay, let me explain. Okay, suppose we have here the results of my survey with my students. Okay, arguably, we can all agree that these tables represents pairs of data that are really related to each other, but only one of them represents a function. Now let's take a look. On the first table, we have here on the first column, the first set of data, the first column is the name of the students, and on the second column, their corresponding answer to the question. Okay, so the question on the first table is, which subject would you rather pass? Now, each element on the first column corresponds to more than one element on the second column. For example, Mr. Utuhan answers calculus and trigonometry. The same with Mr. Yano and Miss Guido. So each element on the first column corresponds to more than one element on the second column. Okay? Which makes it not a function. Ibig sabihin, the first table is not a function actually. The same with the second column because each element on the first column corresponds to more than one element on the second column. So Miss Goodies would rather have love and money. The same with Mr. Bartes and Miss Cabiao. Okay, on the third table, on the other hand, on the third table, you can see that each element on the first column corresponds only to a single element on the second column. That is Miss Cormero only wants to pass on her subjects. The same with Mr. Marilia and Mr. Baleros. Okay, so each element, each student corresponds to a single output. Their answer is to pass. Okay, so when we define function, it's actually the rule that a function is the rule that defines the relationship between two set of data, but it should guarantee that for every input there should only one output. Okay, for every input there should only be one corresponding output. So that's how you define a function. Okay, now, as a civil engineering student, you might be asking, you should be asking, why are we studying function? Why do we want to why we as your teachers wants you to understand function. Ano ba? What's the significance of function to your course? Okay? Why is it not enough? Bakit hindi sapat na malaman lang natin how to create equations? Okay? Why do we still need to differentiate function from relation? Because by the way, all of these tables represents a relation. Okay? Table number 1 is a relation. Table number 2 is a relation. Table number 3 is also a relation. But out of these three, only table 3 represents a function. So you could say that a function is also a relation, but not all relation is a function. Okay, so that's the difference between relation and function. Okay, now let's go back to the significance of this lesson to your profession, future profession. Okay, so why do we need to study function? Okay, now the very definition of a function, as I have said earlier, is it guarantees that for every input, there's only one output. And because of that, function is very ideal to be used in evaluating your, because in the future kasi, as civil engineers, in the future, you would be designing, you would be constructing, designing, say, structures, buildings, for example. You would be designing buildings. And you want to know if this building can withstand certain parameters or certain force, for example, wind force. Okay, so you want to know if your structure can withstand certain amount of force coming from the wind. Okay, so I have here an example. Okay, so the main question there, when you design, is it safe? Is it safe to wind? Okay, so let's take a look at this table. Now, suppose you have a building, you have a design of a building, and then you created a mathematical model representing its capacity or its performance to wind velocity. Okay, so we have here the table, the resulting table. Okay, so in the first column we have there the wind velocity, and on the second column we have there the result of your evaluation. Okay, so it was found out that for 100 kilometers per hour, using your mathematical model, it was found out that for 100 kilometers per hour, yes, it's still safe to be used by your end user. The building is still safe to be used. The same with 150 kilometers per hour, 200 and 250 kilometers per hour. So it's still safe to be used. Your building is still safe to be used by the end user. Now, for 300 kilometers per hour, it was found out that your building is no longer safe to be used by its end user. And how much more for wind velocity with greater than 300 kilometers per hour. Okay? So what I'm trying to say is, because of your mathematical model, which is a function, you would know that you would know the capacity of your structure until what specific wind velocity ang kaya ma-withstand ng building. That's one of the reason why we are using function, because it guarantees that for every single input there's only one output. Because okay, let's take a look at this one. Okay, suppose you have this table. Okay, take a look the difference. Let's take a look with the difference between these two tables. On the second table, for every wind velocity, say for example 100 kilometers per hour, okay, the remarks there is inconclusive. Sometimes yes, it's safe, sometimes it's not safe. Okay, so ibig sabihin, the result is inconclusive because you could not really identify if it is really safe or not safe, diba? So the result is inconclusive. That's because the mathematical model used in evaluating the performance of the building is not a function, because again, a function guarantees that there's only one output for every input. Okay, That's what makes it ideal to be used in the evaluation of your structure, your design function. That's the very reason why you need to study function. Okay. So we have here four ways to represent a function. There are four different ways we can represent a function. So we have here number one, illustration number one. We can represent a function in terms of arrow diagram. Okay, so which of the following arrow diagram represents a function? Okay, so letter A. Look at letter A. You can see that every element in X corresponds to a single element in Y. Diba? Am I right? So -1, only the output for -1 is -7, single output. 0, only -5. Ibig sabihin, for every element in the X column corresponds to a single element in the Y column. That makes it a function. That makes it a function. Okay? So letter A is a function. How about letter B? Okay. Now you have here 0. Your 0 here corresponds to more than one output, more than one element on the Y column. So 0, it corresponds to -1 and 1. Okay. So that means letter B is not a function because one element in X corresponds to more than one element in Y. Okay, so that makes it not a function. How about letter C? Okay, let's check. -1, it corresponds to a single output, which is -7. 2, it corresponds to a single output, which is -7 also. Although -1 and 2 corresponds to the same output, but since -1 only corresponds to a single output, -2 only corresponds to a single output, still letter C is a function because ang definition mala sa function, as long as every input corresponds to a single output, it's a function. Okay, so letter C is still a function. Okay, so ang function dito is letter A is a function, letter B is not a function, letter C is also a function. Okay? So that's how you represent a function in terms of arrow diagram. Okay, illustration number 2, set of ordered pair. Okay, so how do we determine if a set of ordered pair? By the way, when we say ordered pair, it's actually inside the parentheses. The first letter is an X. The first number is an X, abscissa or X coordinate, and the second number is Y. This is always included in a parenthesis. So for letter A, there are how many elements? 1, 2, 3, 4. There are 4 elements for set A. Okay? So that's how you identify the number of elements. Elements are separated by comma. Okay, anyways, so how do we determine if a given set of ordered pair is a function? Okay. Now let's check. Set A, you can transfer kasi this ordered pair in terms of arrow diagram. For example, for letter A, we have X and Y. Okay, so on X, we have -1. It corresponds to -3. This one. -x and -3. Okay, and it has also 0 and it corresponds to -1. And we have 1 corresponding to 3 and 2 corresponding to 9. Now you can see that each element in X corresponds to a single output in Y. Diba? Ibig sabihin, letter A is a function. How about letter B? Let's try to check. Okay, let me just erase this one. How about letter B? Oh, we have there -2 and the resulting Y is 0. We also have 0 and 0. Let me just use the same 0 na lang. 0 also. And we have 1, 0 also. The result is 0. And we have 2, the corresponding result for y is 8. Now you can say that -2, you can see that -2, 0, and 1 corresponds to the same output, which is 0. But still, it's still a function because -2 corresponds to a single output. 0, 0 corresponds to a single output. 1 corresponds to a single output. So even though -2, 0, and 1 they have the same output, but still only one output. I mean, each element corresponds to a single output. That means that letter B is still a function. Okay? How about letter C? Let's try to erase this first. Let's try to check letter C. Let me just erase this one. Okay. How about letter C? So we have here 0, 1. Have 0, -1. Let me just use the same 0. Okay. So 0, 1. And 0 also corresponds to -1. And we have 4, 3 correspond to also to -3. This one. Okay. So you can see that each element in in X corresponds to more than one element in Y. That means that letter C is not a function. Diba? Letter C is not a function. Okay, so how would we identify if the given ordered pair is a function without having to transform this into an arrow diagram? Okay, you just need to check if the abscissa, this is the abscissa, this is the ordinate. Okay, or the x coordinate, the y coordinate. Abscissa, ordinate. Okay, just need to look for the abscissa or the x coordinate if two elements, okay, one element, another element, another element, another element. If two elements on the set contains the same abscissa or the same x coordinate, then that means that that set is not a function. Example, these two elements, this one, contains the same abscissa 0. O ibig sabihin, letter C, set C is not a function. O yun pa, this element and this element, it should have comma there. Okay, each element contains the same abscissa, the same x coordinate. That means, indeed, letter C is not a function. This is not a function. Letter A and letter B is a function because no two elements on the set contains the same abscissa. Okay, so that's how you identify a function if the given is an ordered pair. We also have the equation. Okay, so how do we identify if the given equation is not a function or if it is a function? Okay, let me just identify first which of these are the functions. We have here A is a function, C is a function, G is a function, F is a function. E is not a function, B is also not a function. So what are the similarities between these two? A, C, D, and F. What are the similarities between these four? And the similarities between B and E. Okay, so to identify if an equation is a function, you just need to look at the exponent of the dependent variable. Dependent variable, or y. You just need to look for the exponent of y. If the exponent of y is more than 1, meaning if the exponent is is more than 1, that means that that equation is not a function. For example, letter A, we have here the y. This is the y. The exponent of y here is 1, di ba? Understood na kasi pag hindi nilagay, pag walang exponent, understood that the exponent of that term or of that number is 1. So the exponent of y here is 1, meaning since the exponent is 1, it's still a function. Letter A is a function. How about letter B? Look here, this is the y. The exponent of y here is more than 1. It's 3, right? So, ibig sabihin, that's not a function. How about letter C? The exponent is 1. Ibig sabihin, it's a function. Letter D is a function because the exponent is 1. Letter E is not a function because the exponent is more than 1. It's 2. Letter F is also a function because the exponent is 1. Okay? So just need to look for the exponent of y, or the dependent variable, because we have two types of variables kasi. The x here is what we call the independent variable, and y here is the dependent. Bakit dependent? Okay, okay, I will explain this later. I have a better example of this later. Okay, so that's how you identify if an equation is a function or not. Okay, let's go to illustration number 4. Function represented in a graph. So how do we identify if a graph, is a function? Okay, this is very easy. We just need to do what we call the vertical line test. Vertical line test. So what is a vertical line test? Basically, you just have to pass a vertical line on the graph and see if the vertical line intersects the graph more than once. Okay, so for example, you have here letter A. You have here the vertical line. It intersects. By the way, you can put the vertical line anywhere, or it's best to move this vertical line on your head, okay, to the left and to the right. If it guarantees that even if you move the vertical line to the left and to the right, if it guarantees that it will only intersect the graph once, then that means that graph is a function, represents a function. Like this one, even though if you move this vertical line to the left and to the right, it will guarantee that it will only intersect the graph only once. Okay, this means that letter A is a function. How about letter B? Okay, this is the vertical line. Okay, natural, if you draw your vertical line here, it will not intersect the graph. But if you move this graph here, because a graph is a function if the vertical line, even if you move the vertical line to the left and to the right, dapat all throughout, it will not intersect the graph more than once. Like this one, if the vertical line is here, you could say it will not intersect the graph more than once. May kasama ring a function. O try to move the vertical line to the left. Baka magduha na siya. Okay, like this one. If the vertical line is here, we have here 2 intersection. So letter B is not a is not a function. Letter C is a function because it only intersects the graph once. Okay, so that's how you identify if a given graph is a function or not. Okay, now there are generally two types of function. We have one-to-one function and many-to-one function. Okay, so one-to-one function for an arrow diagram, if you have x and y, so we have 1 to 1, 1, 2, 3, corresponding to 0, 1, 2. Each element in x corresponds to a unique element in y. Okay, 1 to 1. Another one, how about many to 1? Wait lang. For many to 1, you have x and y. Okay, so we have here, say 1, 2, 3. All of these elements corresponds to a single, the same output, say 4. All elements in x corresponds to a single, the same element in y. This is still a function because each element in x corresponds to a single element in y. But this is many, kasi many ang x to 1. Many to 1, this is many 1. Okay, many to 1 and 1 to many. That's the difference between 1 to 1 and many to 1 function. Okay, if the graph is given, how do we identify if it is 1 to 1? Suppose you identify a point along the x, any point at all. It could be this point, or it could be this point, any point. Let's say this point na lang. Okay, if you project this point to the graph, it will intersect the graph here, and project that point to the y, it will intersect here. Okay, even if you extend this line, it will not intersect the graph anymore. That means that this is a one-to-one because 1x, 1y. Okay? Kahit saan pang point yan. Oh, same here. If you choose this point, project this point to your graph, it will intersect the graph here. And project this point to your y, it will intersect the y here. Even if you extend this line pa, it will not intersect the graph anymore. So, dalawa lang. I mean, 1:1. 1x and 1y. Okay? So, this is 1:1. The same here. You choose this point, project that here, and project this here. Oh, 1:1. This is 1:1 function. How about this one? Okay. You choose a point in x, project this one here, and project this to the y. Oh, it will intersect here. But if you extend this one, it will still intersect here. And the intersection, when you project this to x, so there are 2x. This one and this one. Many x to 1 y. Many to 1. Many to 1. The same here. If you project this point here and project it to the y, and if you extend this line, it will intersect the graph here, and you can still project this to x. So there are 2x, this one and this one, to 1y. Many to 1. Okay? So that's the difference between one-to-one function and many-to-one function. Next. Okay. Classification of function. So how do we classify functions? Okay, there are generally two types of classification of functions. Okay, so the concept of functions provide an essential tools in the formulation of the mathematical models in solving problems in calculus. It is important for the student to understand the properties of different types of algebraic functions. Okay, the functions are classified as either algebraic or transcendental functions. An algebraic function in the form of f of x, y is equal to f of x, is classified further as we have here polynomial functions, which polynomial functions is such that all terms of the function contains x with a whole number exponent. So dapat ang tanan na x na present sa polynomial function, it should only contains an exponent that are positive integers, including 0. So 0, 1, 2, 3. So 0, if the exponent of x is, of all the x, is 0, 1, 2, 3, and so on and so forth, and then that means it's a polynomial function. Okay? If any of the term of the f of x of the function is it contains x with a negative or fractional exponent. So ibig sabihin, ang polynomial function, this one, ang exponent ng x is an integer, a positive integer, 0 including 0. But if the exponent of x is a negative or a fraction, then it's not a polynomial function anymore. We call it non-polynomial function. Okay? We also have what we call a rational function. This is a function with a polynomial numerator and polynomial denominator. So fraction siya. Rational function is a fraction where the numerator is a polynomial and the denominator is also a polynomial. So it's a rational function. Okay, we also have what we call a rational function. A rational function is a function which contains a variable in the radical. So a variable in a radical. So we have a radical sign here. If you have here an x, for example, y is equal to x. Ibig sabihin, this function is a irrational function. Okay, because x is inside the radical sign. Or for example, um, yes, yes. I'm sorry. Okay, so we have also have transcendental functions. Okay, transcendental function. This includes trigonometric function, inverse trigonometric function, exponential function, logarithmic function, hyperbolic function, inverse hyperbolic function. Okay, so these are the types of function that falls under the category transcendental function. By the way, transcendental function will be discussed later on module 5. So, medyo maiha-iha pa. Okay, so these are the classification of functions. Okay, now again, remember, a function is a rule that defines the relationship between two groups. And these groups are often referred to as sets. So we have set X and set Y. And each set are composed of elements. So we have elements on set X, we have elements on set Y. Okay? And set X is the collection of all the inputs, and set Y is the collection of all the outputs. Okay, and set is represented in mathematics. Set is often represented in this mathematical notation. Okay, so we have X, which is equal to, then inside the bracket, inside the bracket, you put there the elements. Okay, like this one. Okay, that's how we write in mathematical notation the sets. And this one, your X is what we call, the set X is what we call the domain, and set Y is what we call the range. And since we'll be dealing with equation functions written in equation form, okay, your X here will be what we call the independent variable, and your Y here will be called as the dependent variable. Okay, you heard the independent and dependent variable twice now. Let me explain it later. Okay, so let us first define what is the domain and range of a function. What's the definition of domain and range? Okay, so we see to represent the domain, we just collected all of the elements on set X and you put it inside the parenthesis, inside the bracket. So how do you define domain? Okay, based on what we do, how do you do what we did? How do you define domain? Okay, domain is the set of all values of the independent variable X. So basically, we just collected all the values in set X, and that's the domain. The domain is the set of all values of the independent variable X, while the range is the set of all values of the dependent variable Y. Okay, so that's the definition of the domain and range. Okay, so how do we find domain and range of a function? Okay, based on our definition. Okay, now, since we'll be dealing with equations, functions that are represented in an equation, okay, this definition would be proved to be very difficult. Problematic, because based on the definition, for example, in domain, which is the set of all values of the independent variable X, if you are trying to find for the domain, you will then substitute any value of X and say that this values is the domain. Okay? But if we put here the word permissible values, now you cannot just put any values to X and say that it is part of the domain, because you have there the word permissible. Okay? So you cannot just put any values to X and say that it is the domain, because in the first place, it should be a permissible value of X. Okay? So that's the word, that's the complete definition of the domain. Domain is the set of all permissible values of the independent variable x. Now for the range, it should be range is the set of all possible values of the dependent variable y. Okay, now let's inspect the definition. Let's try to dissect the definition of domain. So domain daw is the set of all permissible values of the independent variable x. So, ano bang ibig sabihin ng permissible values na yan? How can we say that a value of x, that this number is a permissible value of x? Okay, so basically there are just two criteria that we are two criteria to say that a certain number is a permissible value of x. Okay, so we have here number one, it should be a real number. That number should be a real number. And number two, it should produce a real number. It should produce. So what do I mean by that? Okay, suppose we have this equation. Okay. So this is a function because the exponent of y is only 1. Okay, so how do we determine the domain and range of this equation, of this function? Well, you just have to create your table of values. Okay, so take note, domain is the set of all permissible values. So you will try to look for all the permissible values. You have to start somewhere. Okay, so you have to start somewhere. Let's start at 0. Say you have here 0. Oops, let me just use a moment. Let's use this color. Okay, so we have here 0. Suppose we have 0. And so you would ask yourself, is 0 a permissible value of x? Okay, adi ang criteria. We have two criteria. Number 1, is it a real number? Is 0 a real number? Ano ba talaga yung real number na yan? Basically, a real number is any number at all. Any number that can be located in the real number line. Okay, let me just discuss that first. Okay, so suppose we have here a real number line. This is the real number. So we have here the 0, we have here 1, 2, so on and so forth, -1, -2, so on and so forth. So here we have here the negative infinity. This arrow represents to, ibig sabihin, it's a never-ending line. So it represents the negative infinity, and this one, this is until to the positive infinity. Okay, so what is a real number? As I have said earlier, a real number is any number that can be located on the real number line. For example, 1. O saan ba yung 1 dyan? O you can locate it. It's here. 2. O it's here. O ibig sabihin, 1, 2, 3, and so on and so forth until the infinity. It's a real number. The same with -1, -2. Okay, it's a real number. How about negative? 1/2 fraction. How about 1/2? Can you locate 1/2? Yes, of course, you can locate 1/2 on the real number line. Therefore, 1/2 is also a real number. It's between 0 and 1 here. This is 1/2. Since you can locate 1/2 on the real number line, so it's a real number. Okay? How about pi? How about pi? Let me just erase this one. Let's extend this one. Okay. So we have here 3 to the positive infinity. I need 4 positive infinity. Okay. So how about pi? Take note that pi is approximately equal to 3.14. Okay? So, although pi is an non-terminating decimal, sabihin it's an irrational number. It's non-terminating decimal. So, although it's a non-terminating decimal, it's still a real number because although you cannot pinpoint exactly where pi lies, but you can locate it. So this is Somewhere here is 3.5. Somewhere in between 3 and 4 is 3.5. 3.14, 3.25. Somewhere here is the pi. Okay? So, any number that you can locate on the real number line is a real number. That's pretty much all number that you know, except what we call imaginary number. So, amo niya mga diri real number. That's why it's called imaginary number. Okay, imaginary number represented by I. This is equal to the square root of -1. Square root of a -1 is not a real number. Okay, so any number that contains an imaginary number is not a real number. Okay, so that's the definition of a real number. Okay, so to answer the question, is 0 a real number? Yes, it's a real number. Now, number 2, it should produce a real number. It should produce. What do we mean by that? Produce. Okay, so I have here the equation. Y is equal to x. So when you copy it here, y is equal to x. Now, you substitute 0 to x. This will become 0. So y is equal to 0. Ibig sabihin, 0 is the... when you substitute 0 to x, the resulting value of y is 0. Ibig sabihin, 0 produced a real number. Okay? 0 produced a real number value in y. Ibig sabihin, since the resulting value of y is also a real number, diba? 0 is a real number. Ibig sabihin, we also satisfy this criteria. Again, it should be a real number and it should produce a real number. And when we say produce, diba? Okay, I used the word dependent and independent variable kanina. So what's the difference between the two? Okay, bakit yung x ang independent? Your x here is the independent. Independent. It's because the values of x, the values of x does not depend on anything. Okay, you can put any values of x as long as it is a permissible value. That's why it's independent. Okay, however, your value of y depends. That's why it is dependent. That's why it's a dependent variable, because the value of y depends on the values of x. So, ang y, like this one, y is 0 because x is 0. The values of y, the value of y just depends on the values of x. That's why it's called dependent variable. Okay? So that's the difference between the two. Okay, anyways. Let me just erase this one. Okay. So we have here 0. So ibig sabihin 0 is a permissible value of x. Now, you have to ask yourself, is 0 the domain of the function? 0 ba ang domain ng function? No, because from the definition, domain is the set of all. Ibig sabihin set, ibig sabihin the collection of all permissible values of x. Meaning, your 0 here is just an element. It's just an element of the domain. Okay? So, you have to try again. How about 1? Oh, the resulting value of y is 1 also. The resulting value of, if the x is 2 a real number? Yes, it's a real number. So, you satisfy this criteria. Would it produce another real number when you substitute it to the value, to your equation? The resulting y is 2, di ba? Ibig sabihin, this 2 is a permissible values. Also 3, and so on and so forth. Diba? So, basically, okay, let me just erase this one. Basically, oops. Wait. Okay. And let me draw again. Zero, 1, 2, -1, -2, -3. This is to negative infinity, and this is to positive infinity. Ibig sabihin, from 0 to the positive infinity is a permissible values. Also, -1, -2, but the resulting y is -1 and -2, and so on and so forth also. So, because of the equation, because of this equation. So, meaning, also, from 0 until the negative infinity is also a permissible value of x. You get me? So, basically, from negative infinity to positive infinity, this number, from negative infinity to positive infinity, is a permissible values of x. So, basically, that's everything. Every number from negative infinity to positive infinity. So you would say domain is all real number. All real number. But when we write our answer for the domain, we usually write it in there are two ways we can write the domain. We can write it in set builder notation. Let me just write it here. Sorry. Set builder notation. Builder notation. And the other one is, I forgot the interval notation. Okay, so set builder notation and interval notation. Okay, so let's talk about interval notation, Laanay. So ano ba ang ibig sabihin ng interval notation? This one. What does it mean? Interval notation. When we say interval notation, interval. So from 0 to 1, interval ito niya. From 2 to 3, 2 to infinity, from 0 to negative infinity. That's an interval. Okay, for this one, since our domain is from negative infinity to positive infinity, so that's basically our real number. So how do we write that in interval notation? We write it like this. From negative infinity to positive infinity. Positive infinity. This is your domain. That's how you write the domain. From negative infinity to positive infinity in interval notation. Or in set builder notation, okay? In set builder notation, let me just put a line here indicating that. Okay. This one is the interval notation. Set builder notation naman, you could write it like this. Okay, of course, with this bracket, x such that x is a real number. That's it. X such that x is a real number. So, if this is a real number, if x is a real number, then it's part of the domain. It's an element of the domain. Okay? Basta real number siya, that's an element of the domain. So, this, how do we read this one? X such that x is a real number. Okay? So, if x is a real number, then it's part of the domain. It's an element of the domain. Okay? So, that's how you write. That's how we write the domain and range of a function. Okay, let us try this one. Okay. So how do we find this domain? Okay. So must-start ka na naman. Take note ha, these are the criteria for permissible values. So you have to start somewhere. Okay? you have to start somewhere. So for example, if I start at 0, okay, when I substitute 0 to our equation, take note, y is equal to 1 over x. And I will substitute 0 to x. Okay, let me just erase this x. And I will substitute the value 0. Now, what's the result? Is it 0? No, it's not 0. Division of 0 is not allowed. Ibig sabihin, this is undefined. Undefined. With D, undefined. Okay, so ibig sabihin, when x is 0, y is undefined. You cannot define what is the value of y. So, okay, let us try to evaluate if 0 is a permissible value. Okay, criteria number 1, check. 0 is a real number, but did it produce a real number? No, it did not produce because the result is undefined. Ibig sabihin, 0 is not a permissible value of x. Okay? That's the time where you can say that, oh, this number is not a permissible value. Okay? So how about 1? When you substitute 1 to your equation, y is equals to 1 over 1. The result is 1. Okay? Yes, it is a real number and it produced a real number. So 1 is an element of the domain. How about 2? Y is equal to 1/2. How about 3? Y is equal to 1/3. Now, can you see the pattern? If this is 4, y is equal to 1/4. Okay? As this number on x, as the number in x increases, the number in y decreases because nagiging kon, but real number lagi hap. So ibig sabihin, if this goes on forever, okay, the resulting value of y is still a real number. Ibig sabihin, from 0 until, but excluding 0 Okay, let me explain that. We have this number line. This is until to the positive infinity. This is until the negative infinity. You have there 0, 1, 2, 3. So on and so forth. Negative 1, negative 2, negative 3. And so on and so forth. Ibig sabihin, from 0, excluding 0 from 0, excluding 0, until the positive infinity, it is a permissible. Those numbers are permissible values of x. Okay? So from 0 until to the negative to positive infinity, they are all permissible values of x. Except 0, because when x is 0, we can see that the resulting value of y is undefined. So 0, ang 0 hindi siya kasama, pero siya ang starting from 0 to the positive infinity, but excluding 0. Okay? Now let's try negative 1. Kung negative 1 naman, the resulting value of y is 1 over negative 1, which is equal to negative 1. Okay. Negative 1 is still a real number. Therefore, negative 1 is also included. For negative 2, y is equal to negative 1/2. And so on. Negative 3, negative 1/3 ang value ng y. So, ibig sabihin, also from 0 until to the positive infinity and negative infinity is also a permissible values of x. So basically, all numbers from negative infinity to the positive infinity is a permissible value except 0. 0 lang ang natatanging exemption. Okay? So how do you write that? How do we write that in set builder notation or in interval notation? So the domain here, that's the domain. O in set builder notation or interval notation lang muna. Okay this one. Okay, so I'll write, since 0 is not included, we'll use the parentheses like this one. From here, from 0 until to the positive infinity, this one is a permissible value. From 0 also until to the positive infinity is a permissible value. So how do we write that? This one. From negative infinity to 0 union with 0 to positive infinity. Okay? We used parentheses. Parentheses ang atong ginamit. This one. By the way, kung infinity or negative infinity or positive infinity, we always use the parentheses. This one. Okay? Now, why did we use parentheses here? It's because 0 is excluded. 0 is excluded. For example, we have a number line here. This is to positive infinity. So, for example, if the domain is from 4, 5, 6, and so on and so forth. From 4 to the positive infinity. From 4 to the positive infinity, including 4. Ibig sabihin, upod an 4. Didi kasi is gin-exclude naton an 0, excluding 0. So here, if 4 is included, you use this, this sign. You use the bracket. So, 4 is included from 4 to positive infinity. Use this bracket. That means that from 4 to positive infinity is included, is the domain, including 4 itself. Okay? Here, we use parentheses. That means that from 0 to positive infinity, but excluding 0. Nakuha? Okay ha? So this is how you write it in interval form. Just put a line here. In set builder notation, you write it like this. Of course, set builder notation nga ni, may permihin nga bracket. Okay, x such that x is a real number. Of course, it should be a real number and not equal sign with a slash, not equal to 0. Okay, let me erase this one. That's how you write it. And of course, magpadis dapat. Magpadis dapat ha. This one and this one. Dapat permi may asawa. Okay, so x such that x is a real number but not equal to 0. That's how you write it in set builder notation. Okay? Okay. So that's how you find the domain of a function. Okay, now let's talk about the range of a function. It is defined as the set of all possible values of the dependent variable y. The word there is possible. Bakit possible? Bakit possible yung ginamit, not permissible? Because domain, take note, domain is the independent variable. You can just put any values to x to find it if it is permissible or not. Kasi yung y, the values of y only depends on the values of x. That's why the word there is possible. Okay? Okay. Sige. Let's take an example. This example. Y is equal to 4x squared. Of course, before we find for the range, let us first find the domain. So how do we find this domain? Okay. Take note ha, you have to start somewhere. Preferably 0 or anything or any number. Any number at all. Of course, ayaw paghirayua. Ayaw pag-start ha 1 million. Okay? Okay, let's start at 0. When x is 0, what's the value of y? Okay, y is equals to 4x squared. What's the x? 0 squared. Just substitute 0 to x here. Okay, this is equal to 0. So let's evaluate. 0 is a real number and it produced another real number. Therefore, 0 is a permissible value. How about 1? What's the value of y? When x is 1, the value of y is 4 times 1 squared is 4. How about 2? When x is 2, the value of y is 4 times 2 squared. 4 times 4 is 16. Okay, can you see the pattern? When this is 3, what's the value of y? 3 times 3, 9. 9 times 4 is 36. This is 36. Okay? So, 0, 4, 16, 36. It increases. Okay? Nag-i-increase lang siya. So, natural, kung mag-increase pa in nga to, if this number, if the value of x increases infinitely, then y also increases infinitely. But, still a real number. So, ibig sabihin, okay, let me draw again. This is positive infinity. This is the negative infinity. 0, 1, 2, 3, and so on and so forth. So from 0, including 0 from 0 to the positive infinity, it is a part of the domain. It is a permissible value of x. But still, we haven't covered the negative integers. How about negative 1? What's the value of y? This is 4. Negative 1 squared. Negative 1 squared is 1 times 4. This is 4. If this is negative 2, y is equals to 16, right? 16. If this is negative 3, y is equals to 36. Can you see the pattern? Can you see the pattern? Okay. This is actually symmetrical. 0, 4, 0, 4, 16, 32. 0, 4, 16, 32. Can you see the symmetry? That means, from 0, again from 0, tipakad to negative integers to the negative infinity is also a permissible value of x. Okay? So, let me put it here. From 0 until the negative infinity is also a permissible values of x. So, basically, from negative infinity to positive infinity is a permissible values of x. So, how do we write the domain? Domain is actually in interval form, that is from negative infinity to positive infinity. Take note we always use parentheses when we are dealing with infinity. Infinity nga, negative infinity or positive infinity, there it pwede maging bracket, sugad. It's not right we always use parentheses when it is infinity, negative infinity or positive infinity. Or using the set builder notation, we can use x such that x is a real number. All real number. Okay? That's how you write it. Okay. Now, let us try to look for the range. How do we find the range? Okay. We have here the value, the definition of the range. Range daw is a set of all possible values. Ang mga possible values of the dependent variable y. Now look at our value. Okay. Here 0. Okay. When x increases to the positive infinity, here 0, 1, 2, 3. When it increases to the positive infinity, here's your value of y. 0, 4, 16, and 36. Okay? So, the value of y also increases infinitely. Okay? 0, 4, 16, 36, and so on and so forth. How about when you go down? 0, negative 1, negative 2, negative 3, ang value of x. Your y also from 0, 4, 16, 36. That means that the only possible value of y is 0, 0 pabaw-baw. It cannot be a negative value because for whatever value of x, kahit anong value ang ilagay mo dito sa x, ang value ng y, it will not produce a negative integer. Ibig sabihin, the possible values of y lang is from 0 to positive infinity. It cannot be below 0 for the y. That's why the word there is possible value. That's the range. Okay? Let me draw it. Okay, let me just, okay, wait lang. Let me just erase this one. Okay. So, this is y-axis, diba? Y. Downward is the negative infinity. Upward is the positive infinity. Okay. Okay, this is 0, 1, 2. Here is negative 1, negative 2, and so on and so forth. Okay, look at this one. 0 is the lowest value because when x decreases, negative 1 siya, nag-increase man lang ang y. Ibig sabihin, ang values of y mo, ang values of y is from 0, including 0, including 0 to positive infinity. It is impossible for this equation to generate a negative value of y. Okay? It is impossible for this equation to generate a negative value of y. Ibig sabihin, your range, okay? Your range in interval form is from 0 to positive infinity. Okay, from 0 to positive infinity. So, positive infinity, you always use parentheses. How about sa 0? Ano yung gagamitin natin? Is it parenthesis or bracket? Okay? We will use bracket. Bakit bracket? Because included ang 0 sa range, sa possible values. Okay, right here, di ba? 0. Kasi included ang 0 sa positive, sa range ng ating equation. Okay? That's why we use the bracket. Okay? Okay, so let me just erase this one. So this is the range. Let me erase again and rewrite it. Okay, so range. This is from, we used 0 to positive infinity. By the way, when you use, when you are using is a real number, hindi yan mawawala ha. X should be a real number. Sorry, hindi pala X. This is Y. Sorry. Let me write it again. Y, such that Y is a real number. Let me write this one. Okay. Y, such that Y is a real number, comma, from 0 to negative infinity, di ba? It should be Y, sorry. Ano ba yan? Y is greater than or equal to 0. So, from 0 to positive infinity. 0 to positive infinity. Greater than or equal to 0. So, that means from 0 to positive infinity. So, this is your range. That's how you find the domain and range of a function. Okay, so I will end my discussion here for this topic, the function. The part 2 of this video will be uploaded next week. Thank you and happy learning.